The existential meaning of the bureaucratized world. For a long while now, the revolt of Arisach breaking with his civil service life has no longer been possible. Bureaucracy has become omnipresent, and nowhere can it be escaped. Nowhere would one find a rose house and live there in intimate connection with things as they are in themselves. We have moved irrevocably from Stifter's world to Kafka's. When in the past my parents went on vacation, they would buy their tickets at the railroad station 10 minutes before the train was to leave. They would stay in a country inn where, on the last day, they would pay their bill in cash to the proprietor. They were still living in Stifter's world. My vacation takes place in a different world. I buy the tickets 2 months ahead, standing in line at the travel agency. There, a bureaucrat takes me in hand and phones Air France, where other bureaucrats I will never lay eyes on will book me a seat in an airplane and register my name under a number in a passenger list. My room I also book in advance by telephoning a receptionist who puts my request on her computer and informs its own little administration of it. The day I am to leave, the bureaucrats of a trade union, having quarreled with the Air France bureaucrats, call a strike. After many telephone calls on my part and without asking my pardon, no one ever asked Kay's pardon. Administrations stand beyond courtesy. Air France reimburses me and I buy a train ticket. During my vacation, I pay everywhere with my credit card, and each of my meals is registered at the Paris bank and thereby made available to other bureaucrats. For instance, the ones at the tax bureau, or, should I ever be suspected of a crime, the police. For my little vacations, a whole brigade of bureaucrats moves into action. And I turn myself into a bureaucrat of my own life, filling out questionnaires, submitting claims, filing documents in my own archives. The difference between my parents' life and mine is striking. The bureaucracy has infiltrated the whole tissue of life. Quote, never till now anywhere had Kay seen the administration and life so thoroughly enmeshed. So enmeshed that it sometimes seemed that the administration and life had changed places, end of quote. The castle. Suddenly every concept of existence has shifted meaning. The concept of freedom. There is no institution that prohibits the surveyor Kay from doing as he wants. But with all that freedom, what can he actually do? What can a citizen with all his rights change about his immediate environment? About the parking lot being built below his house? About the howling loudspeaker set up across from his windows? His freedom is limitless and powerless. The concept of private life. No one means to stop Kay from making love to Frida, even though she is the mistress of the omnipotent clam. Still, the eyes of the castle follow Kay everywhere, and his couplings are meticulously observed and noted. The two assistants assigned him are with him for that purpose. When Kay complains of their intrusiveness, Frida protests. Darling, what have you got against the assistants? We have nothing to hide from them. No one will dispute our right to a private life, but it is no longer what it used to be. No secrecy protects it. Wherever we may be, our traces remain in computers. Frida says, we have nothing to hide from them. We no longer even demand secrecy. Private life no longer demands privacy. The concept of time. When one man conflicts with another, two equal times are in conflict, two limited times of perishable life. Well, these days we are confronting not one another, but administrations whose life knows neither youth, nor age, nor fatigue, nor death, and occurs outside of human time. Man and administration experience two different times. In a newspaper, I read the commonplace story of a small French industrialist whose business failed because his debtor had not paid him what was owed. He feels he is innocent, wants to defend himself in court, but he gives up right away. His case could not be heard for 4 years. Procedure is life. Excuse me. Procedure is long. Life is short. Which reminds me of the merchant Bloch in Kafka's The Trial. His case is dragged on for 5.5 years with no decision. Meanwhile, he has had to abandon his business because, quote, if you want to do something for your trial, you can no longer attend to anything else, end of quote. It is not cruelty that undoes the Surveyor K, but the non-human time of the castle. Man asks for audiences. The castle postpones them. Litigation goes on. Life ends. Then adventure. In other times, the word used to express the excitement of life conceived as freedom. A courageous individual decision would unleash a surprising chain of actions, all of them free and intentional. But this concept of adventure does not correspond to what Kay experiences. He arrives in the village because through some misunderstanding between two departments at the castle, he has been summoned there by error. It is not his own will, but an administrative error that sets off his adventure, which has ontologically nothing to do with a Don Quixote's or a Rastignac's. Because of the immensity of the bureaucratic apparatus, errors become statistically inevitable. The use of computers renders them ever less easy to spot and ever more irreparable. In our lives, where everything is planned out, determined, the only possible unexpected event is some error of the administrative machinery with its unforeseeable consequences. Bureaucratic error becomes the only poetry, a dark poetry, of our time. The concept of adventure is akin to that of combat. Kay often uses this word when he speaks of his dispute with the castle. But what does his combat consist of? A few fruitless encounters with bureaucrats and a long wait. No bodily struggles. They don't have bodies, our adversaries. Insurance, Social Security, Chamber of Commerce, Justice, Tax Bureau, Police, Prefecture, City Hall. We battle by spending hours and hours in offices, waiting rooms, archives. At the end of the battle, what awaits us? Victory? Sometimes. But what's that? According to Max Broad's account, Kafka imagined this ending for the castle. After all his troubles, Kay dies of exhaustion. He is on his deathbed when, I quote Broad, quote, there arrives from the castle the decision declaring that he has not really got the right to live in the village, but that he is nonetheless authorized to live and work there in view of certain special circumstances, end of quote. The ages of life concealed behind the curtain. I let file past me the novels I remember, and I try to make out the various ages of their protagonists. Curiously, they are all younger than I recalled. That is because for their authors, they represented a general human situation more than the specific situation of a character's age. After all his adventures, having come to understand that he no longer cares to live in the world around him, Fabrice Del Dongo goes off to the Charterhouse of Parma. I've always adored that ending, but Fabrice is still very young. How long could a man of his age, no matter how sadly disappointed he may be, stand living in a monastery? Stendhal evades the question by letting Fabrice die after a single year spent in the Charterhouse. Mishkin was 26. Rogozhin, 27. Nastasia Filipovna, 25. Aglaya is only 20, and she is the one who, through her nonsensical actions, ends by destroying the lives of all the others. Yet the immaturity of these characters is not explored as such. Dostoevsky is giving us the drama of human beings, not the drama of youth. Romanian by birth, E.M. Cioran settles in Paris in 1937 at age 26. 10 years later, he publishes the first of his books written in French and becomes one of the great French writers of his time. In the 1990s, Europe, once so indulgent toward nascent Nazism, now marches boldly forth to battle its ghosts. The time has come for a major settling of accounts with the past, and the fascist opinions of the young Cioran back when he was living in Romania suddenly become news. In 1995, at the age of 84, he dies. I open an important Paris newspaper and find a 2-page spread on obituaries. Not a word on his 60 years of work. It is his Romanian youth that has disgusted, fascinated, infuriated, inspired his funerary scribes. They have robed the cadaver of the French writer in a costume from Romanian folklore and forced it in the coffin to raise its arm in the fascist salute. Sometime later, I read a text that Cioran wrote in 1949 when he was 38, quote, "I could not even imagine my past, and when I think of it now, it seems to be showing me the life of some other person, and that other person is what I repudiate. My whole self is someplace else, 1,000 leagues away from the person he was." And farther on, when I think back to all the delirium of my then self, I seem to be observing the obsessions of a stranger, and I am stupefied to learn that that stranger was myself. What interests me in this piece is the amazement of the man who cannot find any link between his present self and the past one, who is stupefied before the enigma of his identity. But you'll say, is that amazement sincere? Certainly it is. In its usual version, everyone has experienced it. How in the world could I ever have taken seriously that philosophical or religious, artistic, political trend? Or else, more banally, how could I have fallen in love with such a silly woman, stupid man? Well, whereas for most people, youth goes by fast and its mistakes evaporate without leaving much trace, Cioran's turned to stone. One cannot laugh off a ridiculous sweetheart and fascism with the same condescending smile. Stupefied, Cioran looked back on his past and flew into a rage. I am still quoting from the same 1949 text. Quote, "Evil is the doing of young people. They are the ones who advocate doctrines of intolerance and put them into practice. They're the ones who have need of blood, shouting, turbulence, and barbarism. At the time when I was young, all of Europe had faith in youth. All of Europe urged the young into politics, into affairs of state. How many Fabrices, Aglaas, Nastasias, Mishkins I see around me. They are all just beginning the journey into the unknown. No question they are drifting. But theirs is a singular sort of drifting. They drift without knowing that's what they are doing. For they are doubly inexperienced. They do not know the world and they do not know themselves. Only when they look back on it from the distance of adulthood will they see their drifting as drifting. And besides, only with that distance will they be capable of understanding the very notion of drifting. For the moment, with no understanding of the view the future will one day take of their long-gone youth, they defend their own convictions far more aggressively than an adult man would defend his, a man who has had experience with the fragility of human certainties. Cioran's outburst against youth shows something obvious. From each observation post standing along the line that runs from birth to death, the world looks different and the attitudes of the person looking out from it change as well. No one will understand another person except by first of all understanding his age. Of course, that's so obvious, so very obvious, but only an ideological pseudo-obviousness can be seen at once. With an existential obviousness, the more obvious it is, the less visible. The ages of life stand concealed behind the curtain. Morning freedom, evening freedom. When Picasso painted his first Cubist picture, he was 26. All over the world, several other painters of his generation joined up and followed him. If a 60-year-old had rushed to imitate him by doing Cubism at the time, he would have seemed, and rightly so, grotesque. For a young person's freedom and an old person's freedom are separate continents. Quote, young, you are strong in company, old in solitude, end of quote, wrote Goethe, the old Goethe, in an epigram. Indeed, when young people set about attacking acknowledged ideas, established forms, they like to do it in bands. When Derain and Matisse, at the start of the past century, spent long weeks together on the beaches of Collioure, they were painting pictures that looked alike, were marked by the same fauve aesthetic, yet neither thought of himself as the epigony of the other, and indeed neither was. In cheerful solidarity, the Surrealists saluted the 1924 death of Anatole France with a memorably foolish obituary pamphlet. Cadaver, we do not like your brethren, wrote poet Paul Éluard, age 29. With Anatole France, a bit of human servility departs the world. Let there be rejoicing the day we bury guile, traditionalism, patriotism, opportunism, skepticism, realism, and heartlessness, wrote André Breton, age 28. May he who has just croaked take his turn going up in smoke. Little is left of any man. It is still revolting to imagine about this one that he ever even existed, wrote Louis Aragon, age 27. I think again of Cioran's words about the young and their need for blood, shouting turbulence, but I hasten to add that those young poets pissing on the corpse of a great novelist were nonetheless real poets, admirable poets. Their genius and their foolishness sprang from the same source. They were violently, lyrically aggressive toward the past, and with the same lyrical violence were devoted to the future, of which they considered themselves the legal executors, and which they knew would bless their joyous collective urine. Then comes the moment when Picasso is old. He is alone, abandoned by his crowd, and abandoned as well by the history of painting, which in the meantime had gone in a different direction. With no regrets, with a hedonistic delight, his painting had never brimmed with such good humor. He settles into the house of his art, knowing that the new is to be found not only up ahead on the great highway, but also to the left, the right, above, below, behind, in every possible direction from the inimitable world that is his alone. For no one will imitate him. The young imitate the young. The old do not imitate the old. It is not easy for an innovative young artist to seduce the public and make himself beloved. But later on, when inspired by his vesperal freedom, he once again transforms his style and abandons the image people had of him, the public hesitates to follow him. Linked with the young world of Italian cinema, that great cinema that no longer exists, Fellini enjoyed unanimous admiration for a long time. Amarcord, 1973, was the last of his films on whose poetic beauty everyone agreed. After that, his fantasy gets still wilder, and his gaze sharpens, his poetry turns anti-lyrical, his modernism anti-modern. The 7 films of his last 15 years are an implacable portrait of the world we live in. Casanova, the image of show-off sexuality taken to grotesque extremes. Orchestra rehearsals, City of Women, and The Ship Sails On, a farewell to the Europe whose ship is sailing into the void, to the accompaniment of opera arias. Ginger and Fred, Interview, a great farewell to cinema, to modern art, to art pure and simple. The Voice of the Moon, a final farewell. Over the course of those years, irritated both by his very demanding aesthetic and by the disenchanted gaze he leveled at their contemporary world, fashionable society, the press, the audience, and even the producers turned away from him, no longer obligated to anyone. He savored the joyful irresponsibility, his words, of a freedom he had never known before. During his last 10 years, Beethoven has nothing more to expect from Vienna, from its aristocracy, from its musicians who honor him but no longer listen to him, nor does he listen to them, actually, if only because he is deaf. He's at the peak of his art. His sonatas and quartets are like nothing else. In the complexity of their construction, they are far from classicism, yet do not come close to the facile spontaneity of the young romantics. In the evolution of music, he has gone off in a direction where no one has followed, without disciples, without successors. The work from his vesperal freedom is a miracle, an island